Dr. Wright? Here.
Superintendent Macaluso, do you have any corrections or modifications to the agenda?
Thank you, President Voss. At this time, there are no corrections or modifications to the agenda.
Then I move that we adopt the agenda as presented.
Second.
Call the vote, please.
Ms. Clementi?
Aye.
Mr. Farrell?
Aye.
Judge May?
Aye.
Mr. Ross?
Aye.
Dr. Wright? Aye.
Superintendent Macaluso?
Thank you, President Voss. Before we get started with our work session, if it's appropriate, I'd like to make a statement. It is with profound sadness and an extremely heavy heart that we confirm that one of our high school assistant principals has unexpectedly passed away. Ms. Reina Montes served as an outstanding assistant principal at East High School. She was beloved by our students and families at East High School for the last 6 years. Her dedication to our school district dates back to 2003 when she first started as a science teacher at South High School. She will be greatly missed by all who knew her. Our deepest condolences and thoughts go out to her family and friends during this difficult time. Anybody who knew Ms. Montes knew that she was an advocate for students, cared deeply about our students, and she will be greatly missed. She was a true professional. So our district community, our East High community, and our broader public community is grieving her loss at this time.
Thank you, Superintendent Macaluso. We'll move now to our work session, and we'll start with the community schools update.
Thank you, President Voss. At this time, I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Ted Johnson, who serves as Executive Director of Continuous Improvement and Innovation, and he will introduce a couple of guests that he has today. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Superintendent Macaluso, and good afternoon, President Voss and members of the board. It is our pleasure today to present to you the findings of the exploratory committee for community schools with regard to the feasibility of implementing the community schools model in Pueblo District 60. Our committee, consisting of teachers, school and district leaders, community members, and parents, has been working tirelessly during the last several months to gather information and to provide recommendations to the board regarding a number of questions as related to the community schools model. Joining me today are two members of our committee, Justina Carter, co-chair and PEA vice president, and Teresa Trujillo, director of organizing with the Center for Health Progress.
It's been a few months since our committee was able to bring forth a report. So we wanted to provide a quick reminder of what makes a school a community school. Our committee utilized the framework and definitions that are used by NEA, the National Education Association, as the basis for our investigations. Thank you, Board Member Clementi, for turning on the lights. This is very helpful. NEA has identified 6 components or 6 pillars that form the community schools model. So first is the culturally relevant. Should I be switching slides? I want to get to the 6 pillars piece. This is Risley's presentation, not the community schools presentation. Okay. No, that's okay.
We actually have a copy.
So I can continue. Great. Fantastic.
Yes. And those who are watching can catch up.
Great. All right. So we'll get to the slides for those who are watching, but the board does have this slide deck in front of them. So the 6 pillars that we just wanted to remind you of that make a school a community school are a culturally relevant curriculum, and that is an inspiring curriculum and programs that really engage students' natural curiosity, that are well-rounded, inclusive of arts and sciences, and really prepare them for college or a career. The second pillar is high-quality teaching and learning. It is inclusive of fully licensed, knowledgeable educators who are collaborative in their approach to instruction, curriculum design, and school improvement. The third pillar is inclusive leadership. That includes collaborative planning and implementation that really tears down the silos between classrooms and the front office and represents the best interests of the students. The fourth pillar is positive behavior practices, establishing an environment where social cultural considerations are part of the program of emotional and academic supports for all students. The fifth pillar is family and community partnerships, partnerships and integration of programs and services with support from local businesses, community, and other civic groups. And the final pillar that makes a school a community school is community support services. So coordinated and integrated wraparound support programs and services could be dental care, mental health care, after school or out of school programming, et cetera, that are inclusive to the needs of students, their families, and the community surrounding the school. So it's also important to remember that community schools will look different based on the context of the school and their identified needs. A key component to the model is the use of a broad needs assessment. And that said, most community schools have these central 6 components as the key features of their model. Justina?
For successful community schools, one of the first things that our group sought to identify were the conditions or criteria that are necessary to create successful implementation of community schools. Our group identified a number of components that we feel are critical to this success. First, the community schools model requires a vision shared by all stakeholders. A successful program includes buy-in from all participants, especially the families at the school. In a practical way, we heard time and time again through site visits and in conversations that successful programs have identified a designated coordinator who is charged with implementing the model at the school site. Community school coordinators work closely with school staff and stakeholders, and the coordinator's role cannot be an add-on to the work of a building administrator or other staff member because the scope of the work is too great. Additionally, successful programs include designated space at the school for the program. We would recommend that this essential space include a dedicated entrance, preferably one that would provide privacy. One of the key features of any community school is the level of customization that occurs based on a needs and assets assessment conducted at the school. Successful programs identify the community interests and needs through a comprehensive needs assessment of the school community. This ensures that the resources and programming being provided are what is needed by the community. This assessment informs and drives the work of the community school. A key to this is also that there's a robust and proactive family engagement of the school community supported by the efforts of the community school coordinator. Successful community school model development requires that a significant number of families have a chance to provide input into the needs assessment so that there's a clear understanding of what the community needs and is interested in. Typically, these assessments seek to obtain a 75% response rate from the community. This level of outreach may include a number of things, including phone calls, surveys, and home visits. It's essential that communication is provided in the home language of the families so that they're able to share information in a way that is both comfortable and authentic. When a comprehensive needs assessment has occurred, the community schools model can begin to organize the resources and programming identified in the process. These resources are marshaled to support the success of students in a strategic way. It's also important to note that the community schools model isn't static. Successful programs are flexible and grow and adapt over time.
And so thank you very much to the tech staff. The slide deck is now matching our presentation, and we'll move forward as we do. Another aspect of implementing community schools here in Pueblo is taking advantage of the many strengths that we have in our community. Pueblo has a large network of community agencies and organizations that can support and are willing to support a community schools model. And these groups are very broad ranging. For example, there are groups that are presently working in many of our schools like Boys and Girls Clubs, local churches, there are other institutions of faith, the United Way, Health Solutions, the local library, Pueblo Community Health Centers. They're all examples of really fantastic partners that are already in schools and are working closely with the district. So their ongoing work and experience really gives us an excellent opportunity to implement a community schools model with a number of agencies and resources that are already familiar with our schools and who have already been vetted and already have strong partnerships. A community schools model really provides an opportunity to create an inclusive, coordinated, and strategic approach to supporting these school services. Additionally, our local education association has been instrumental in advocating for a local community schools model. Through their advocacy, this has also opened up access to a whole network of resources nationally and support through contacts at the National Education Association, as well as through contacts at existing community schools throughout the country.
To implement a community schools model effectively requires a number of stakeholders to come together and work toward a successful design and implementation. Part of what makes these models successful is when all stakeholders are invested in its success. Students and families are at the heart of the model. The model provides them access to the resources and supports identified through the needs assessment. They participate in the design, implementation, and ongoing community schools programming. They're part of an advisory council that helps to define the community schools' focus and in the recruitment of relevant partners. They assist with reaching out to other families to help them access and participate in community school offerings. Family members often become key volunteers for programming and offering through the community school. Staff members support and promote the community school, its role in the community, and what it can do to support families. They are instrumental in helping students and families get connected into the community school. Helping all stakeholders to understand and implement the community schools approach, developing and designing the community schools action plan, and working with the many partners that support the model is the work of the community schools coordinator. The coordinator oversees the program at the school from start to finish. They interface with community partners, attend both school and community meetings, serve as the main point of contact for teachers seeking to connect students and families with resources, and monitor and analyze goals related to the action plan. Community partners are also critical stakeholders in the process. They work with the coordinator to establish and align supports to the community school, as well as serve as recruiters for other agencies and organizations. In some models, community partners may also contribute financial support or logistical and administrative services to ensure sustainability of the model over time. School leaders work to promote the model within their schools and work closely with the community school coordinator to maximize the supports and programming available to students and families. Finally, district leadership and the Board of Education play a part by helping to address any barriers or issues that arise. They work to help secure financial support for the program. They may also consider providing flexibility with regard to policy when necessary to support the successful functioning of a community school.
One of the great things about the community schools model is that it is not a high-cost program to design and implement. The largest cost factor is the hiring of a community schools coordinator. And this coordinator is hired early in the process and works to plan and implement the community school model based on the needs assessment conducted among school stakeholders. Additional expenditures will typically include general operational costs such as printing, meals, providing childcare for meetings or translation services when needed, and other types of supports and supplies. There may also be some cost at the onset to provide an appropriate space for a program within a school building. There are also options to consider when thinking about funding of a community school model. Community schools may find some of their funding through various grants, and districts may choose to fund a community school or a portion of it through state and federal funds. One example might be to look at schools that qualify for an EASY grant support from CDE. And our group has begun to look at a number of potential funding sources, including startup grants for community schools. Some of those are offered through NEA. Local, state, and national foundations will sometimes offer grants for these types of programs. And then, as I mentioned before, state and federal grants and funding.
Investigation and discussions, our committee found that there are many benefits that the model can realize from the implementation of, that the district can realize from the implementation of a community schools model. The organizational structure of the model involves stakeholders from the very beginning. Parents and families gain a sense of ownership and responsibility for the community school, creating buy-in and promoting more meaningful and authentic family involvement and engagement. Stronger buy-in and engagement also leads to a sense of belonging and comfort in the community schools model. When families feel a stronger sense of belonging and connectedness to the school, students are less likely to be absent. Additionally, many community schools identify tutoring and academic support as a need. By providing more opportunities for educational support, a community school can support the academic goals of the school and reinforce study habits among students. And we know that when students begin to achieve academically, they become more engaged and more likely to participate in more challenging academic work. This model also offers a benefit to staff. As resources and supports become more readily available to students and their families, teachers are able to worry less about the immediate needs of their students and can focus more on helping them to succeed academically. The community schools model is an assets-based approach. By engaging in a pilot community school or schools, the district has an opportunity to build off of what has come before, learn from the successes and challenges, and leverage these to better support students from across the district. By connecting students and families with support in and out of school, this model can also help address the issues of equity which may have been amplified in the current pandemic. We can work toward removing barriers and delivering opportunities to empower children to learn and succeed.
Through our work together, we've also sought to identify some of the potential challenges and barriers to implementing a community schools model. The first of these is logistics. The development of a community school includes a number of moving parts, some of which occur almost simultaneously. And this is where the role of that community schools coordinator is critical. The first phase in the community schools process is usually a planning year. And this time is used by the community schools coordinator to start putting some of those pieces in place. Cost is obviously another consideration. Part of implementing a successful community schools model is to ensure that the programming isn't solely reliant on a funding that is limited or isn't sustainable. When considering cost, we would recommend that the budget for a community school be a multi-year commitment and potentially be funded out of more than one source. And that ensures that if there are budget cuts, the program isn't eliminated completely and there's opportunities to pursue funding in different ways. Shared or inclusive leadership is another aspect of the community school that generated a lot of discussion in our committee. We think that inclusive leadership is reflected in a number of ways within the model. First, it involves a strong degree of collaboration amongst all stakeholders. By increasing the frequency and nature of communications to be multi-directional, all stakeholder voices are heard as the community school is developed and goals and objectives are identified. It is especially important for our students and their families to have regular and consistent avenues to express themselves and creating a responsive and supportive environment. It's also important for school leaders as it provides a means to share ideas and receive feedback on initiatives and programs that support the school moving forward. Through the community school model, opportunities are created that allow a variety of the stakeholders to deepen their involvement in empowering them to become leaders of the initiatives and goals that have been collaboratively developed. Inclusive leadership is also reflected in the collaboration that is developed with community agencies and organizations. By enlisting them in the community schools model, they're able to lead initiatives and help to close the gaps where a school may lack the needed resources. A fourth and important consideration has to do with perception. The Community Schools Exploratory Committee has been a collaborative experience which includes school teachers and leaders, district and association leadership, community partners, and parents. And it's common knowledge that the union and the district don't always see eye to eye, but we found a lot of common ground and agreement through this work in this committee. And we see this as a tremendously positive opportunity to build a stronger relationship together. And then finally, one of the most ever-present challenges we're facing right now is, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic that seems to affect almost every aspect of our lives. And we recognize that the consideration of a community schools pilot in this environment presents its own unique challenges, but we also want to uncover how it might create unique opportunities. Given that this pandemic has had a profound impact on the social, financial, and health situation of our committee, this model is well poised to provide some relief and some stability to our families in what might be their greatest moment of need.
final piece our committee would like to share are some recommended next steps for your consideration. We've begun to develop several tools and resources that can be utilized to move a community schools initiative forward. We'd like to highlight a few of those with you in your packet. The first of these is a sample timeline. We've put together some of the key steps that would be necessary to launch a community schools pilot in the short term. Second, I think you'll find an example of the job description for a community schools coordinator. You'll also find an example of what a community schools application might look like that a school would complete in order to signal their interest in the process. And one of the things we've uncovered through this process is that we don't have to start from scratch. We're not out to reinvent the wheel here. As the prevalence of this model grows, there are a multitude of resources and supports that can be accessed and utilized. Also included in your packet is an example of a week-by-week cohort guide. As you can see, the resources, this resource provides a way for the local community school coordinator, whomever that may be, to interact with colleagues from across the country who are also going through an implementation process to receive support for the work that they'd be doing.
Thank you very much for your time and consideration. And before we open up for some questions, I'd like to just take a moment to recognize the many individuals from our committee that have dedicated their time, thoughts, and energies during the last year to this work. They've been at meetings, they've made calls, they've dug around on the internet. Several of them have done visits to community schools around the country. But I'd like to thank Suzanne Etheridge, Justina Carter, Jill Massaro, Denise Torres, Jamie Stanger, Susan Sanchez, Suzanne Mori, Donald Moore, Teresa Trujillo, Esperanza Saucedo, and Yesenia Beascochea for their work. And with that, oh, I just shut it off. There we go. With that, we'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions from the board? Mr. Farrell?
Yes, I have questions.
Dr. Wright, we'll let Mr. Farrell go, and then you can go after him.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Thank you to the three of you for the presentation today and for everybody who's served on the task force. It's evident that you've put a lot of effort into supporting with resources and a lot of good information that you've shared with us today. I know you mentioned that some of the task force members have done some visits to existing community schools. Do you have some highlights of those visits, of what you noticed that would be relevant to our district or strengths for us?
Yeah, it was an interesting process. Donald Moore, for example, happened to be traveling before the COVID pandemic struck, and so he let us know where he was going, and we got in touch with NEA and some of the folks there through PEA, and he was able to stop by and visit a couple of schools there and talk with leadership in the school. And where was he at? He was in Indianapolis?
I think he was in Austin.
And
Texas.
Austin,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
There was a small group who went together to visit community schools in Taos, New Mexico. Their entire school district has adopted that model after having a pilot and sort of figuring this out over about a 5 or 6 year process. And that was, I think, really helpful to have educators be a part of that so that they could really ask questions around the logistics of space and how the process works in a school. There were lots of questions around what does shared leadership really look like, and what does, what happens when you have some parts of your school that have, or some students who have much higher needs than other folks in your school, and how do you sort of manage some of those processes? And I think also that process really yielded some relationship building for folks who, as we hopefully move forward in this, could be resources.
One of the things that Mr. Moore shared when he went to Austin, it was kind of interesting with the visits because the group that went to Taos, that was a very kind of nascent new community schools project, whereas in Austin it's one that's been established and been around for a number of years. One of the things that was interesting, I think, with the Austin trip that he mentioned is that really when they mention community schools, it really is a community approach. So the school was interfacing, and I think the group in Austin that did a lot of the support was called Austin Voices. But Austin Voices took a lot of the lead in terms of initiating the program. So it wasn't this thing that came on top of the school or the school teachers and administration to do on their own. It really was a community effort.
It was both born of a community effort and sustained through community effort. Yeah.
Thank you.
Dr. Wright?
Yes. I also, first of all, want to thank the committee and also thank our presenters tonight for this presentation. I just have a few questions. With the feasibility study, I know we're looking at how practical it is to do this project. So is it fair to say we're looking at if we would do it, how we would do it?
So some of those materials of the how are in our recommended next steps that those kinds of tools. So one of the very first steps is engaging and hiring a community schools coordinator. And then that coordinator would be responsible with school leadership to conduct that broad-based needs assessment. And that 75% statistic that Justina mentioned is really the base, is really the expectation, certainly coming out of everything that we've seen in other schools and out of the model that was developed through the National Education Association, is that 75% is really the bare minimum of families that you want to be reaching through this needs assessment. And so that needs assessment then begins to guide some of those next steps. And so I'm not sure I'm answering your...
Yeah, well, I would just add to that. I think, if we had the opportunity to move forward, there is a sample timeline that kind of highlights some of the key pieces. One of the first things it has to do is you have to find schools that are interested and that would like to move forward with this. So part of the work that this committee would need to continue, I think, in some form or fashion for a while to get the message out to share with schools and school communities what the model is about. We would want to develop the application process because there is a process to go through for that. Help in working on the selection of school or potential schools to do that. And then I think those would kind of be the initial next steps. And then as Ms. Trujillo mentioned, then identifying, posting and hiring for a community schools coordinator. That would probably be something that would be done in conjunction with the school very closely, because that person would be working very closely with the school, so we would want them to be involved and use obviously our hiring practices to make sure that our practices were fair and appropriate. Those would be the immediate next steps, and then once a community schools coordinator were to be hired, then that person would really assume a lot of the role in terms of working to get that needs and assets assessment done, to start building that model out based on what they found out. So like I said, it's a very long, intensive process to get to that community school model. Most of the places talk about a year to do that.
And I think it's worth mentioning that a number of folks on this task force, at your invitation, did say that they would be willing to stay on and help support that evolving process.
I guess my question is, for clarity's sake, have we decided to implement it, or are we still deciding whether we will implement it?
Dr. Wright, I think that's a question for the superintendent and the board to entertain.
Okay, well, let me ask you this then, along the same lines. The reason I'm asking is because in looking at your sample timeline, it looks like, I know it's a sample, but it looks like in order to begin in September of 2020, it would be necessary to begin at this time in order to have the opening of this school in August of 2021. Yes. So I wasn't sure if the committee has a deadline for completion of your feasibility study.
So this presentation really is our deadline for that feasibility. That's what we're presenting today. The timeline is a sample timeline. we're obviously, as a committee, we've worked very hard. We're very eager to think about moving forward with that. It's a sample timeline. It's an example of what it could look like. It probably isn't fully inclusive of everything that would come up, so we would want to probably hash some things out a little bit further. But we were actually very deliberate in putting sample and example on all of those things, so with the hope that this would be of interest, but it is something that certainly could be adjusted based on the needs of the current situation.
Thank you. I can appreciate that. Looking at some of your potential challenges and considerations with cost, were you able to look at Denver and Austin and Taos, and I'm not sure if Jefferson County has a community school? Were you able to look at their funding and determine what % of funding came from the federal government, what % came from grants?
I don't believe we got into that level of detail, or I certainly don't think in Austin that it was that they delved into the budget a lot. I can't speak for the Taos trip. I don't know.
No.
Okay. And also, in looking at the coordinator's job description, I don't think it had education requirements.
Yeah, and again, these are examples. These are, we didn't. These are things that would be continued work of this committee to hash out and develop further. So these are just pieces that we kind of were able to pull together to share with you to give some semblance or idea of what it's about.
And we deliberately left some flexibility in there to make sure we're meeting the needs of this district.
In the sample, it does provide for a bachelor's degree and so forth, but I'm sure that's all flexible in terms of.
In Taos, their community school coordinators are all credentialed teachers.
Okay, thank you. Just one more question then. Well, with this information, are you saying the next step, one of the next steps, would be for specific schools to be identified in our district that may be interested in implementing this model?
Yeah, so I think the next step would be to see which schools we're interested in. I don't know that it's necessarily the role of the committee to identify which are the schools. We would like the opportunity to share with schools and school communities about the model and find schools that are interested. These models seem to be most successful when there's some consensus and agreement. It's not something that you can impose on a school. It's really something that they have to be interested in, and to do that, we would need to market the model and share that with them a little bit.
Well, I greatly appreciate the work that you've done looking into this model, and I appreciate Superintendent and her staff for exploring it for our community. So thank you guys so very much. Appreciate the information.
You're welcome.
Judge Banks?
Ms. Carter, I'll direct this to you because I think you're the one that mentioned it. I'm interested in the needs and assets assessment, and you talked about a 75 response rate from the community. First off, define for me community, and what does 75% mean?
So in the models that we have talked about, they made sure that they had interacted or got information from 75% of the families in the school. I'm not sure how they determine who makes the community outside of the school, but I know that it was 75% of students' families that are enrolled in that school.
So I guess my question is this, would there be a certain time period involved in doing this survey? I mean, for instance, if you didn't get a 75% response, would you say, okay, we're going to give it an additional 2 weeks? What would go into the process that would reach out to the families to ensure that we have a 75% response rate?
Sure. We have, the community school coordinator really is the one who does that, who really finds ways, whatever it takes to get in touch with that many of their families. And they've done it, they do it sometimes through trying to bring families into the school or through just reaching out in other ways to get a hold of them.
Would that be an essential element prior to, would that be one of the first things that the coordinator would have to do? Because you have to have the buy-in from 75% of the community to begin with, right?
So, well, once the school is identified and the coordinator, then yes, then interacting with 75% of the families, yes, is an important first step.
And I guess in terms of the timeline on all this, I think the initial determination would be for this board to determine whether we want to encourage these folks to continue their work and to proceed along that way before we get into the situation involving seeing what schools we want to be involved, right? Is that okay? And whoever wants to answer this question, fine. And we're going to get to this issue at some point or another, and I think it was even mentioned in the presentation. And when we talk about inclusive leadership, and can any of you give me or give us, what that looks like? What is it? What's the governance model with inclusive leadership? How does that look?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at this a little bit. In our discussions and in preparing for this presentation, there's not a singular definition of inclusive leadership. That's how NEA describes it in their 6 pillars, is a shared or inclusive leadership. What we've talked about is that what's really essential in the success of this model is a strong degree of collaboration and continuity between the school administrators and the advisory council. So it's really about, at least in my mind, it's really about that establishing a vision that's common, establishing goals and objectives that everybody understands and feels that those are the correct goals and objectives. One of the things that in NEA had produced a video of kind of the community school model, and they talked about how one of the parents was sharing it in this video about how they had identified a need as a group around, I think it was some after-school programming or tutoring, and the parent kind of took on a role in helping support and get that organized. And so sharing in the leadership of making sure those things that they're working on, that happens. The other thing that kind of went with that was that this can't be a model that you give to a principal or you give to an assistant principal and just say, hey, do this, here's some more work for you to do. They were really very specific about that. And I think even in Mr. Moore's visit to Austin, the school was involved, but a lot of the kind of administration and running of the model was done by folks within the programs, and not something the leader was responsible for all the time. In our conversations, I don't think I've had the sense that inclusive leadership really has to do with the group taking over the school or making all the decisions about hiring and instruction, all those pieces. I think we have to recognize that our teachers and our leaders are skilled professionals in those areas, and while they do need to share and communicate those pieces and work with their school communities, that's a high level of expertise they have in the academic world. And so I don't think in my mind, I don't think our community felt like that was the purview of the community schools model, was to make those kinds of decisions.
And none of the schools that we visited or heard from or contacted deviated from what the practices were of their school district. In a lot of ways, especially in the first years of establishing a community school, it is figuring out how do we utilize community resources to meet the sort of downstream needs, the immediate needs that families have and aren't accessing, that may be barriers to their children participating fully in education. Now, there were some examples of schools, as we talked to sort of more developed or talked about more developed schools where maybe they might have a creative idea around restorative justice that they want to put into practice in their school. And that was about the most important piece of that was about the decision-making process that the community, the families, and the community of the school go through in order to determine and to share that information with the broader school. But they didn't deviate or act independently of their school district or in significant ways than the school had operated previously.
Thank you for that. And I wholeheartedly agree that in order for a community schools project to work, that it's going to take a great deal of collaboration among all the parties that are involved in it. And quite frankly, as someone mentioned earlier, we've had some partnerships already in place, so we won't have to reinvent that wheel at all. And I see that working very successfully. I guess where I'm getting at, and I just might as well just put it out on the table, is as a governance model. At the end of the day, I would suspect that the group gets together, they want to do something, assuming there is disparity in where the next step is. Is that a decision that's going to be left to the principal in the school? Or is that going to be a decision that has to be brokered somehow between the principal and the coordinator? At the end of the day, who's going to make the final call is what I'm wondering about in terms of the governance issue.
To the principal, to the extent that the principal already has some level of autonomy in making those decisions under your current governance model. Where that isn't present, then that principal would need to engage with the superintendent and other folks in the district to determine how that might happen.
So the principal would seek help from the administration within the school district itself?
Yeah, if it was an issue that required that, certainly.
Okay.
I mean, they're certainly not going to take issues like our school needs a food bank, where should the food bank be? And in some of those meeting of more immediate needs for families. But in some of those things that we were talking about that sort of develop longer term, like restorative justice, yes, those absolutely need to go through a bigger, broader vetting process and have a lot more folks at the table thinking those through.
And one of the reasons that I'm asking these questions is when we implemented the Project Respect program some years ago, it involved a collaboration among probably 25 different partners in the school. And I think it took us at that time, I don't know that anybody was on the board at that time. Well, I know Mr. Voss and Mr. Farrell were, and you've been around a while, Barb, but I don't think you were there. And my point being is that, as you mentioned, it might take even up to a year to get this project off the ground and stuff, and that's reasonable. And that's kind of what happened with the truancy program, is that I think we made several presentations, but it had a great deal of community support. It works, and so I know it could work. I'm encouraged by what I'm hearing here today, and I also want to thank you for the hard work that you put into this presentation.
Ms. Clementi?
Thank you, and thank you to you three and to the entire committee. This is the information that we've needed, and I'm happy to hear this. Is it the unanimous recommendation of your committee that to this board and to the district that we move forward with this model?
Yeah, I think I would say yes. We didn't have a formal vote or anything like that, but I think the consensus through our discussions was that this is worth continuing to move forward with, and really it's an opportunity, I think, for our district to engage with our community in maybe not necessarily a new way, but it's another opportunity to engage and really get our stakeholder voices into our schools. And we sometimes tend to think of the district as one thing and the city as another thing, and these different pieces, but in reality we all live and work together. And so I think this is a way to invest in our community. I also think it's a way to perhaps tackle some of the challenges that we face in terms of not just helping meet the needs of students, but meet the needs of our school. One of the things that I think there's a lot of potential for is this idea of attendance, and Judge Mays, you mentioned the truancy program. When people feel connected to something, they want to be there, they want to be a part of it. And so this creates an opportunity where when families feel comfortable in our schools and feel like, hey, this is my school, this is, it's our community school, they're going to be more apt to help get their kids there. And when you can offer the right resources and supports, not just in terms of their immediate needs, but also their academic needs through tutoring kinds of things, it's an opportunity to help kids succeed academically. And I think that aligns very nicely with what our district is about.
Thank you. I believe that there are community schools that use this model within the state. Have you had any conversations with those schools? Did you discuss anything with them? Any problems that maybe we could learn from? I think I know that there's one community school in Aurora that closed this year or last year. Can we learn from past mistakes?
I know when we were looking for community schools, I think there was one in the Denver area. I don't know if it's the same one that you were speaking of, but it was a somewhat different model. So we had not had much luck finding in the state a community school model. Taos was pretty close by. I think that's why the group went there. And then as we mentioned, Mr. Moore just happened to be traveling for work in Austin and was able to spend some time there.
The couple that we did know about in Jefferson County are in that first year of getting ready. And so there wasn't a lot to discuss with them. And part of our reason for going to Taos was it was a community that more matched the dynamics of Pueblo and the size of Pueblo. And when you're dealing with these large urban school districts, that can be a little apples to oranges. But the one that closed in Aurora was not an NEA community schools model school. Thank you. Although I think they used the word community schools, which has been bantered about, I think, since the 70s. So, yeah.
Right. Okay. Good. Do we know that we have a commitment of support from the state and national education associations, from CEA and NEA?
I don't think we have a commitment of financial support at this time because we don't have like a proposal. However, we absolutely have support in networking and information, yes.
Great. In your studies, is there a recommendation of which level of school might be more successful, more often used? Do community schools at the elementary level work best? At the middle school, at the high school level? Is there a difference? Did you find anything information like that?
That's a great question.
We certainly talked informally about not wanting to pilot this in a high school, that perhaps the way to engage families in the way that the model works best, elementary and middle school might be the best bets. But I think it's less about a level and more about what's the level of buy-in from the school and the community itself that will make a school successful in this model.
Yeah. There are community school models in the country at all different levels, and there are community school community districts, so there's a lot of different ways that this takes shape.
Great. Okay, thank you. 30-some years ago, I was part of a competitive application process here in the district that included a lot of these same parts. And actually, I think it was quite successful. When I look at your application, I'd ask that perhaps you add some kind of school self-inventory to this, this application that Philadelphia used. It has a lot of good parts to it, and important information. But I think we also need, not just for the application process, but for the schools themselves, to look at themselves and what they are, who they are, what skills they bring to the table, where they could use some more support, those kinds of things. That kind of self-knowledge as a building brings a lot to, I believe, to buy-in and success down the road.
Absolutely, and that would be one of the early tasks that the committee would continue to work on, would be to customize the application for our community. We didn't have that, so we wanted to make sure that you had an example of what it can look like, but that would definitely be a task we'd want to make sure it really fit for our district and our schools.
In terms of inclusive leadership at building levels, would you consider, and governance models, some kind of steering committee at a school level? Again, past experience here shows that when there's a clear division of responsibilities and duties, and who knows who makes the final decision, and there's some structure for access and input, that lends to success.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that we mentioned in this report, and I know there was a lot in there, but this idea of a school advisory committee that helps with that kind of advice. And in all honesty, I mean, that's something that we do a lot within the district anyways. We have, not necessarily with community groups and community, family organizations, but we do have, that idea that with our leaders, that there are things that leaders have to decide, and good leaders get input from their stakeholders, and make decisions on the best interests of that. But that, I do believe that would be a component, is a steering committee or an advisory committee would be part of that process.
Great.
Another solution part of that is that the needs and assets assessment is not a one-time and done. It's an
Okay.
ongoing assessment. And so when those issues would come up, then that would be able to be addressed through that process also.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. It seems to me that in your timeline, there needs to be a little bit of time built in to flesh out some of the important pieces, to flesh out the application, to flesh out the new position, that all those kinds of things. So perhaps that's a piece, and it would be great if the committee as a whole would continue with that kind of information. Among those things, I think perhaps there needs to be some kind of process that works at the district level to work with as those partnerships are developed. We've seen too often partnerships or situations develop at the building level that just don't mesh at the district level. Like, we can't have a partnership with a gun manufacturer, might not be the best partnership, and the district is responsible at some level for that kind of thing. So there needs to be some kind of process that moves up up and down the hierarchy, if you will. So if you'd add that to things to do, along with that clear division of duties and responsibilities at the building level, particularly if you're going to have a community person, community, whatever they're called, and a building leader working together. And lastly, I had something else really important. The position. The position. I have the positions that the information that I think you have here would be a certified position, if I see that right, and I see the sense in that. I'm aware of other systems that have that position that is a certified position, and perhaps even evolves into a part-time position. I see that to begin with, it would need to be full-time. And perhaps if we had a successful pilot, a person in that position could take on a second school. I don't know. But have you considered any of those possibilities? Certified or?
We certainly, I think it's really important because a lot of the things that you're saying need to be developed are developed in that first year. And given the minimum number of 75% of your school needing to be engaged in this broad-based needs assessment, and that the fact that we know that relationship building is what is going to make this successful,
Right.
I think it is really important. And we've been cautioned by several folks in NEA that this person really can't wear too many hats in
Right.
that. They really need to be focused. And so I don't know if that's a 10 years down the road, let's look at how this is evolving, or if something happens and the district decides they want to move to a community schools model, how that might be managed differently by a district. But I think at the very beginning, it would be extremely important for that person to be dedicated just to their school, just to that community, and just to those relationships.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, I think we would, in developing the job and the description, all those things, we would want to work really closely with the Human Resources Department to make sure that it's, posted appropriately, has all of the right criteria, discussions about, is it a certified position? So I won't kid anyone, there's a lot of work to be done. We've done the easy part. With this, quite honestly, and so there would be a lot of work, and obviously that timeline again. I probably should have written sample in great big letters because it's subject to a lot of variables that we just don't know how long it takes to, how much time the committee has to continue doing this work, how long it will take them if they were to develop some of these things, the outreach to schools, what's the time frame for that? Because it's going to have to look different if we move forward with this, and it would have to look different in the current environment than just everybody show up to a meeting, right? So there's a lot of
Yes.
I guess what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of question marks still to be answered.
I would, yes, and I'm glad you see the need for flexibility in your timeline. I suspect that opening a community school in this time next year might be a little aggressive. But given what we've seen today, and with those answers to my questions, I support moving forward with this.
Superintendent Macaluso.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank our committee members. Thank you for devoting your time, talent, and expertise to explore this important topic. I think any time that we can collaborate broadly with our community to provide services to our scholars, that's important and that's beneficial. And any time that we can garner a broader stakeholder voice, then we're in a better position. A couple of things of thoughts. You talked about the perception and being a possible barrier. So that's something that I would request that the team be aware of, and I think you are, and based on just the various questions that even this board had, particularly around the shared leadership, because I think some people may have the perception that shared is equal leadership, and so maybe we just need to clarify that. I think it's important when you go and sell this or explain this process to schools that that's clearly defined, because I think it's really about inclusive and collaborative leadership and hearing that stakeholder voice, because ultimately they're supporting the academic and social emotional goals of the school, right? And at the end of the day, the governance structure is the principal. So I think that's just an important component. And I think the next steps would be to really sell the model, explain the model, and to see who would be interested, and then the funding source. So again, thank you for your work.
Thank you.
I have
you
a
very
few
much.
questions as well. You talked about the cost being fairly minimal to implement the model. Do you have a number associated with what that cost would be?
Well, as we mentioned in the presentation, the largest cost is the cost of the community schools coordinator. And since we don't have that exact number, depending on if it were to be a certified position, it would probably be somewhat commensurate with what an educator might earn. That's going to be based on, of course, some other factors in terms of their experience and some of those things. We heard time and time again that position was really a critical piece of building an effective model. The other pieces really depend. I mean, it really depends on what the site is. Does the site need any kind of modification? Does it need some remodeling or things like that? If it doesn't, that lowers the cost. So I guess this is a really long way of saying, no, we don't have that number.
Okay. Got it. My last question is, how would the committee recommend initiating this model? If we have the application out there, 3 schools want to be a part of it, would you recommend having multiple schools? Is it better to pilot the program? What would be the best way to move forward?
I'll speak. I don't think we've had a lot of in-depth conversations about what would happen if we have multiple schools. I think personally, I am a big proponent of models in terms of innovation, getting that opportunity to pilot something and kind of ideate and build it out, see what works, what doesn't, and then take those lessons learned and apply that in other areas. And then just kind of as an aside to that, I think we could potentially have in this district multiple community schools over time. But similar to the way that we've done with some of the innovation practices in the innovation zone, some of the practices can be applied across the district in ways potentially, just as we do sometimes with innovation, we find things that work and we're able to push that out and make it a practice within our district.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for all of your work, and thank you to the entire committee as well. Superintendent Macaluso, are you looking for direction from the board today as far as moving forward?
I think at this point, I would look for support for continuing to explore.
Okay. And I just want to say I support that as well.
May I have a second?
Sure.
President Hawk? I am wholeheartedly behind this project. And I say that because there has been discussion by certain individuals within this community that put forth the proposition that I was opposed to community schools. And that couldn't be further from the truth. As a matter of fact, I think at one of our board meetings some time ago, we outlined exactly the number of community partners that were involved with Risley and how well that collaborative effort was going. In addition to that, I've been involved in community projects within the school. If you'll recall, Project Respect was hailed as one of the top 3 truancy reduction programs in the entire nation. And that took a great deal of work and collaboration and support from the school board and the administration to get that done. So I saw firsthand how we could gather people together and have something that was very, very successful. Following up with that, we had the Safe Schools, Healthy Students Initiative. If I recall correctly, that was a $6 million grant over a period of 5 years, and it was divided into 5 core areas. The one obviously I was interested in was the mental health area, but we had safety, we had 5 different core areas, and it took a great deal of involvement with the community in order to keep that going. And Troy Davenport, the chief of the police for Pueblo, was our chairperson in that. And if I started mentioning people that were involved in those committees, you'd recognize them right away. In any event, that was highly successful in terms of bringing people together to to accomplish the goals that we needed to accomplish, including early childhood, mental health, and safety, and those issues. And then up until COVID-19 kind of put a screech on things, we had the Adopt a School program that was going on with, I can't remember, Superintendent, how many partners we had in that, but it was quite a few community partners that were going into the schools and working with the students in any number of ways. And so that was just yet another example of how successful programs can be when there is collaboration within the community. So I've never been opposed to that. What I always did ask, though, was for what you've given me today. What do you mean by community school? You know, when these discussions were going on, I was hearing community school. Well, what is it? And up until this committee got together, we really hadn't had anything formally presented to us or informally presented to us. Now we do, and I think it's a great plan. So now we all know what community schools means and how we're going to try to implement it. So I am, just to be clear, I am 100% behind this project, and I think it's going to be very successful. I think you folks have done an outstanding job in identifying not only the good things about it, but what are the challenges are going to be, because our role should be then is, okay, if we have a challenge, how are we going to get around that? How are we going to put our collective minds together to make sure that that is no longer a roadblock, a hindrance to what we're trying to accomplish? So I wish you the best of success on this, and I'm pleased to say that I think we should move forward with it as well.
Ms. Clemente, you said you support moving forward as well. Mr. Farrow?
I'd love to see the committee move forward and look forward to the next steps.
Dr. Wright?
Yes, I very much would like to see that. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have the 2020-2021 staffing update.
Thank you, President Voss. At this time, I'd introduce you to Mr. Eric DeCicero, who serves as Executive Director for Human Resources, and he'll provide a brief update. Clean your area.
He turned me off. I'm still smiling under this stall, I promise. Once again, guys, thank you for giving us this opportunity to provide you with a staffing update going into this school year. I wanted to let you know we've been working very hard to staff our buildings for the 2020-21 school year. Our numbers are changing every day, so some of these positions that I'm going to discuss are also in the process of interviews as we speak. As of today, when this data was pulled, we have 7 open building level teaching positions. These consist of 2 open elementary classroom positions, and at the secondary level, there are 5 current openings that have not been filled. At the middle level, we have 1 position. At the high school level, we have 3 open general ed classroom positions and 1 ESS position. The majority of these positions have a plan or a long-term sub in place at this time. We also have a few positions that are on hold as principals are watching their enrollment numbers come in, and they're using those that information to drive their decisions on what they're going to do with those positions at this time. We also have 23 support staff positions, such as EAs, parapros, health techs, etc. This is pretty similar to what we have each year at this point in time, and these positions, classified ones, do fluctuate throughout the school year, so that's not an anomaly. As far as processing and onboarding, it's been a very productive hiring season. We had to completely reinvent a virtual hiring process that we've been utilizing since the spring due to the pandemic. We've also been working very quickly to process and onboard our new staff. while continuing to find ways to facilitate a process that is welcoming, efficient, and informative with all the COVID guidelines that sometimes feel less than welcoming and inviting. But we're trying to work on that. We will now be working hard to fill these last few vacancies and begin to assess enrollment numbers in the next few weeks to come up with our final staffing allocation for the year. I also do want to thank my staff for the hard work that they have done throughout the spring and summer to get to this point. They've worked diligently through a number of challenges to staff our buildings and to be ready for the opening of school. And even though we're down 2 positions, they're doing what I ask of them each and every day, and I want to commend them for the hard work that they're doing. One other piece of information that I like to bring each year at this time is our retention and retirement information. And I usually go back 4 years just to kind of give you guys an idea of how we're doing in that department. And so by comparison, from 2017, going back 4 years, we had 128 resignations and retirements. In 2018, we had 136. In 2019, we had 118. And up to this point, with 3.5 months to go, we have 95 so far. And considering all the things and the impact of the pandemic, we have a lot of work to do, but we are making some improvements in that area, and I think it's important to point that out. So if you have any other questions at this time.
Ms. Clementi?
Yes, thank you. And yes, and congratulations. Those are good numbers. How are we doing with substitutes? This is a huge issue, I think, right now, everywhere across the country.
It is. It is. The one thing that has been a little helpful is we have a lot of virtual classrooms at this time, which has made the load a little bit less. But we have conversely had a lot of, as Dr. Yusevich talked about last week, we have a lot of subs filling in for gaps and holes in the difference between online and in person for ESS. So it is challenging. We don't have enough. I mean, we're continuing to look at ways to bolster that and continue to work. I think we've been able to fill what we've needed to up to this point, but I'm a little worried when high school and some of those other pieces start to come back that it's going to be even more challenging than it is now.
Would it make sense for us to see if we can't find a way to increase the substitute pay? Again, I know we've done it. We've increased it the last year or two.
Yeah, we have increased it a couple of times, and that has been beneficial. I think, of course, I mean, that would always be something I would be interested in, because that gives us the ability to look at ways to get more people in. The impact, like I said, it's hard to know. I mean, we did see a pretty significant impact the last time we did it. Yeah. So I think it's an option if you would like me to look at, I would be more than happy to look at.
As the need increases, perhaps so.
Then we better check with Dave, but yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say that.
Yes.
That's a question for Mr. Horner, not for
Right.
Mr. DeCesaro.
Because he knows what I'll say. Yeah, let's give him.
Also, do you have any idea how many of our certified staff are dedicating themselves to full-time remote online learning?
As far as you mean from like with an accommodation, or just across the board, the ones that are just
in general?
I could get that for you. We have it, but I don't have it on the top of my head. But if you would like me to,
I'd find it interesting.
Okay, I'll be happy to get that for
Great.
you.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Wright, do you have any questions?
Yes, I do. Thank you very much for your presentation. I know it has been challenging, but I wanted to know, were you able to accommodate each of the staff members, those that were high risk? Were we able to accommodate their needs?
I think I heard all of that, Dr. Wright. I think you asked if we were able to accommodate all the needs that were requested by staff. Is that what the question was?
Yes.
I mean, yes, to the degree that we were able to make reasonable accommodations. We have addressed all of them. I mean, of course, every accommodation that was asked for wasn't reasonable, but I mean, for the most part, we have met all those accommodations with the ability we were able to, and there's nobody waiting on any, if that's the question.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. DeCesaro, Judge Mays.
Mr. DeCesaro, going back again, it seemed to me we had a report the last time around from Dr. Yusevich about our special needs students.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a very positive report. And did I hear you kind of wavering in that now? Are we still on
No, I
board?
think we're still on track. That it's as things are IEPs, of course, as you know, and she knows way more about this than me. But all the individual needs that students have had, there's been places where we've needed to find substitutes to kind of backfill some of the spots. And I think as things evolve and things start to balance out, I think that'll continue to evolve as well. But when we first started up with 2 models, there's just a lot of unknowns and a lot of new variables that get put into place, especially with IEPs and things that a lot of them have different needs, and they're doing a great job of trying to figure out how to meet all those needs, and just need a little extra support with substitutes at this time.
Well, thank you. And that's an area that I'd like for us to really pay close attention to as well. And Board Member Clementi talked about, a couple of years ago, we ratcheted up the substitute pay to $150 for people to qualify for it. And I guess what I would recommend is that we always keep our options over in terms of being able to attract those teachers that are specifically committed to the special needs students, and see if there's some way we make sure that we're always in the pool as far as they're concerned.
Great, and just so you know, we do have a school where we do have a little extra for that particular piece in innovation, where we can offer some differentiation in that way, and that is our number one focus in the future of recruiting, is ESS followed by math, with a close second.
Thank you, Mr. Assessor.
Thank you for all your hard work. We'll move now to the 2020-2021 back to school update.
Thank you. Ms. Maury?
Thank you, Superintendent Macaluso, President Voss, and members of the board. We have had a very successful opening to our school year, especially with the in-person opening at K-8. I think it really went so smoothly because of the preparation that our teachers and our leaders put in place, as well as the communication out to the families and students ahead of time. So they knew what to expect when they came back in terms of the arrival routines and the temperature taking and mask wearing and all of those other things having to do with social distancing. And our buildings were very prepared. I know Superintendent Macaluso and myself had an opportunity on day 1 to visit, I think it was about 8 or 10 of our elementary and middle schools, and we saw firsthand how that went, and it was pretty impressive. So I just want to say thank you to everyone who prepared so well for the return of students. Our high schools opened as well on the same day, with all of the students being fully online. Teachers were teaching synchronously in that hybrid model, as well as preparing asynchronous lessons on the off days. We are still experiencing a lot of schedule adjustments and needs, particularly at the high school level. It's been challenging, honestly, to figure out how to staff multiple models with one staff, and still at the high school level to provide the nuance of course requests at all the different freshman through senior levels. So we are still working on that, and I do want to commend our master schedulers and our administrators who just keep on at it to try to make it work. We have heard some feedback from some of our high school teachers, sharing some of the challenges that they're seeing in the field, and also making some suggestions for consideration. So I wanted you to know that we've reached back out to them. It's important for us to really understand what they're experiencing, and then maybe consider some adjustments to the model. So that's what we're in the middle of right now. Because of that, we have not solidified a back in-person opening date yet for the high school level. So we're sort of putting all of those pieces together and figuring out how best to provide the richest instructional opportunities for our high school students. One of the things that we've been really working on in the last couple of weeks is, as you know, we had given option to our families to say, if you wanted to be fully virtually online, please let us know by a certain date. What we heard is that many families just weren't ready by that date to make that decision. They were still contemplating what was in their child's best interest. So we did open up a change request process again. We literally got hundreds of applications, some wanting to move from in-person to online, some wanting to move from online to in-person, and all of our schools at all levels have been trying to accommodate those. We have just recently closed that change process again. And I would say we are almost there in accommodating the needs for those requests. At the elementary level, there have been some situations where parents have been open to having their child taught by a teacher who wasn't at their home school. If their home school numbers were too full at a particular grade level, virtual or in person, and so that's been helpful. And then I would say at the middle school and high school level, they're really looking even to adjust staffing to try to balance the numbers at their particular school for in-person versus online. So, like I said, I think we're almost there at meeting everybody's needs. And again, the change request process is closed. Preschool opened this week. Again, what was reported to us and what we saw, no major issues with in-person. I again want to commend the teachers and leaders who reached out with the communication because I think that went very smoothly. We have submitted a waiver to CDE that we anticipate is going to be supported. It's going to allow us this year to put half-day slots together to provide more opportunity for full-day preschool, which is the preferred model for our parents in our community. So that's good news. We have, just to reinforce that, we have 5 part-time, half-time models, and then we have 40 full-day. So definitely the full day is what parents are looking for. We have seen some initial decline in numbers. We don't have the exact enrollments yet at preschool, but we are seeing initial decline. There is an interest in providing some sort of an online option for preschool, and so we are exploring that, which includes looking at some of the carryover funds from last year, utilizing those funds to purchase online curriculum and devices that could be distributed to the preschool families. So that's something that we're looking at to try to recapture as many kids as we possibly can. We started this week the warm body count. I don't know if you're all familiar with that, but if you're an educator, you know that that's the process we use at the beginning of the school year to determine who's actually sitting in the seats, whether that's a virtual seat this year or in the classroom. And eventually, that helps us to determine the exact, real, authentic enrollment that we have. So that process is a little bit more complex this year, as you can imagine, with a hybrid model with virtual and in-person, but we did start that this week, and I think probably by the end of next week, we'll have a pretty good idea on where our overall enrollment sits by level and so forth. Nutrition Services has a lot of updates and again complexities because of the situation that we're in, but are doing an amazing job. In addition to the in-school breakfast and lunch distribution, Nutrition Services last week served 2,400 breakfasts and 2,400 lunch meals in bags on Fridays at the 5 pickup locations for those who aren't in person. I don't know if you are aware, but parents can submit requests for the Friday food orders online, and so for next week, we currently have over 550 orders, so that seems to be working pretty well. They know how to order food, and they're coming to get it, which is great. We plan to be able to open up Fridays to all children now that we can serve all children 18 and under based on some new USDA guidelines. This allows us to serve free meals essentially 7 days a week, which is really wonderful. We're serving second meals for the hybrid students right now at the middle school level. So when they leave each day, in-person day, they leave with a meal for the next day, which is helpful for that day off. We're beginning our fresh fruit and vegetable afternoon snack program at the elementaries next week.
Jerry?
Excuse me? And also, we are beginning to service the Boys and Girls Club at Risley and Irving Elementary, providing at-risk after-school meals. And then our community partners are also helping us to serve after-school meals as well in some other locations. So lots of work by our nutrition services staff. Lastly, I wanted you to have a really thorough update on the state of technology. Technology is huge, as you can imagine, this year. And our adults and our students are really dependent upon technology. And so I've asked our district technology director, Zach Mather, to join me today to share an update with you.
We're going to pause for just a moment. Dr. Ryder, are you still on the line? Jerry, are you still on the line? Maybe we can.
Can you hear me? Is anyone still on the line?
So maybe we could just call again.
Text her and say that everybody's lost.
Yes, Jerry lost audio also.
Jerry, can you hear me? Hello? Is anybody on the line? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, so
I can hear you, Dalton.
it seems like we lost connection on the Polycom setup here. Would one of you be able to let me know about where in the report we lost connection? Perhaps we can go back to that.
Last topic.
Well, no, I'm asking them, but I think
Yes,
they just
did-
lost us again.
We're,
Yes. Mr. Sprouse?
Can you
Doc,
hear?
Dr. Wright, were you, did you hear the nutrition services report?
Yeah, I think you had just begun it.
Okay, I
I
could
heard
repeat that.
parts of it.
Would that be a good a place to restart? Okay.
Yeah, all three are there.
Thank you so much.
Of course. As I was sharing, we, of course, are serving our in-school breakfast and lunch to our students every day. But additionally, Nutrition Services last week served 2,400 breakfasts and 2,400 lunches in bags on Friday at 5 different locations. Our parents are submitting requests for those Friday food orders online. We already have 550 of those orders for next week, so that seems to be working well. We plan to open up Fridays to all children now because based on the new USDA guidelines, we're able to serve all free meals like we did this past summer, including to all of our charters, by the way. This is going to be a 3-day bag for off days. Essentially, it feeds students 7 days a week. We've served second meals at the end of the day to all of our middle school students. When they're in person, the end of the day, they leave with a meal so that they have it at home during their off day. We're beginning the fresh fruit and vegetable afternoon snack program in our elementaries, and we're also beginning to service those after-school meals at the Boys and Girls Club and a couple of other locations as well using community partners. And lastly, for our return to school, I wanted to have our district technology director, Zach Mather, share with you an update on technology, what is going well and what is pretty impressive actually this year, and also some of the struggles that we're having and how we're trying to address them.
Good afternoon, Superintendent Macaluso, President Voss, members of the board. It seems very ominous that when the tech guy comes up, the technology has an issue with the phones, but that's kind of where we're at with a lot of this. As you can imagine, this pandemic has put a lot of stuff through technology, and so there is, as Assistant Superintendent Maury said, there's a lot going through stuff. Just a quick high level looking at some things. We have deployed approximately 13,000 Chromebooks right now to our students. That is for both online and in person. If you've seen some reports, we consider ourselves pretty lucky because there are a lot of districts across the country waiting on those devices because of their popularity. And so that's something that we are definitely lucky to have. We've also deployed several hundred iPads to students out for specifically the online first, and we are continuing to get the rest of those iPads out. We have not been able to complete those quite yet, but we are working hard to get that done. They take a little longer to get processed, so we're in the process of doing that. We've also been continuing to work on, but we've started and worked on adding some additional network infrastructure to support more devices. Now that we are really one-to-one and every student's going to have a device, that's also going to put additional strain on our network, and so we are in the process of adding that. We've started that at our elementary schools in those kinder and first grade areas specifically first, and then we'll continue to work through. And as Assistant Superintendent Maury said, we've run into some challenges. Some of that is we're moving fast. You know, we're doing stuff way before we're really ready, but that's what we need to do. That's what we're called to do. One of the biggest challenges right now is Google Meet on iPads. We have identified what we believe to be the main cause of that related to our content filter relay, which has an agent that sits on those devices to provide a safe internet experience. Lightspeed, which is the manufacturer, has admitted that there is an issue there, and we have a ticket open with them. We're on the list to get the beta update, and they're trying to push it as soon as we can. We've also been investigating some other things because that particular problem hasn't presented itself in a very easy manner. So we've been trying to find every rabbit hole and go down that and figure out what's going on, whether it's related to at-home internet or some of those other things. We've also seen some of them haven't affected us as much, but generally speaking across the nation, you've seen a lot of challenges with connectivity on various different platforms. A couple weeks ago, several of the popular ones, Zoom and Schoology, were down. We had some issues with Google Drive the other day, and you're just seeing this as so many school districts and kids are going online. These systems are just being taxed, and so I expect we're not out of the woods with that yet, and we probably won't be for a while. And so it hasn't. Google Drive was the biggest impact to us right now, but that doesn't mean those things won't happen. We did have some T-Mobile stuff the other day, so we'll just continue to work through that. We've also done a lot of work, and Assistant Superintendent Maury mentioned this, especially with the high schools, with Infinite Campus and getting a lot of that back-end stuff set up for rostering and everything else, and that has been a huge lift for some on my team and as well as the staffs out at the high schools. And those things also then tie to a whole bunch of other stuff that we do. So the rostering, where students are located, has a big effect on a whole bunch of other stuff. So those things are all very tied together. And of course, we're working through that and having so many kids also online. To date, we've also distributed approximately 120 hotspots to students to provide internet access. Those are specifically for the online-only students. We did just receive a group of hotspots donated from the library, and we will be working on getting those out early next week, getting all that prepped. And then we also have, if you've seen information from Governor Polis around T-Mobile's Project 10 Million, we are on that list to get some stuff from there. We are just awaiting some further details in terms of how many we can maybe expect and kind of the timeline on that. So we're kind of waiting with bated breath on that, but our name should be on the list. And then the other big thing that we've really been doing a lot is we've really taken on a lot of the tech support for families and students, which to a degree has increased our customer base, if you will, almost tenfold. We usually have been dealing with teachers directly and having the students there, but this whole pandemic has changed that paradigm. So that's been a really big challenge for us, is trying to respond to all that. And it's not just necessarily our devices, right? It's their internet. It could be various different things that are going on, and so we're working our way through that. And then of course we have a whole bunch of other small projects and little things that we're trying to work through in the middle of all that other stuff. So it's been a heavy beginning of the year for us.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mather. I want to thank you so much and your team for everything that you've done. I think since last March, I don't think you've slept. And it really, I just am so grateful for the work, because I actually think we're in very good shape in terms of being able to deliver virtual learning to our students at this time. So thank you for all your work and continuing to fix all of those situations that are coming your way. Our staff is here if you have any other questions about our opening. That is the end of my report.
Thank you, Ms. Maury. I just want to echo your words to Mr. Mathers. Thank you for your leadership. Your entire staff has stepped up in incredible ways, and we sincerely appreciate it. So please share affirmations to your entire team. I know it's been a heavy lift.
I will, thank you.
Are there any questions? Ms. Clementi?
I'd like to also echo that gratefulness to Mr. Mather and all of his team. I don't think people realize how much record keeping and imaging and all the work that has to go into bringing in that number of devices and then adding tech support to our families it's all huge. One of the things that we always have trouble with is logins. And as you're approaching and dealing with that, because it just always doesn't work at some point. It doesn't matter if it's worked for 6 months today when I need to be on with the system. So I would urge your department to consider making sure that there's some kind of administrator access at each building, so that those kinds of issues can be dealt with fairly quickly. I'm sure that would take a little bit off of all of your plates as well. So thank you again for all of that work. If I may, Mrs. Maury, 2 things. Would you remind me again how we are taking attendance? Clearly, at the elementary school, people are there, they're there. Are we taking attendance with a full-time remote and with a hybrid, and how's that?
We are taking attendance at every level for every type of learner, in person or virtual. It just looks a little different each day. So at the elementary level, it's always synchronous or in person, and so the teacher takes it as normal. At the middle school and the high school level, on those synchronous days or the in-person days, it's as normal as it normally would be. The teacher takes attendance. On the asynchronous days, when the students are learning independently, one of the first things they do is to take their own attendance in each of their class periods that they have, and then they work through their work over the course of the day. So they document their own participation in their coursework on those asynchronous days.
Great, thank you. One last thing, I appreciate the obstacles that you've run into, especially at high school, and I imagine a little bit at middle school with the scheduling issues. We've heard from a few teachers, and I would urge you to be flexible with those, we called them singletons, with those classes that are only available once or twice throughout the semester or the year, for students that need to be learning remote. We used to always have problems with high-level language classes, with high-level biology and science classes, with high-level math classes. If a student needs a calculus class or an advanced biology class, maybe there's a way to schedule so that they can be synchronously involved with the class that's being taught in person. Those kinds of things.
Ms. Clementi, that is one of the things that we're exploring right now, and have a time scheduled on Monday, actually, with some practitioners to look at what are the obstacles that we can try to take away, what are some of the scheduling challenges, and what are some of the suggestions, and that's one of them.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I realize how many moving pieces there are in all of this. And I'm not only grateful for Superintendent Macaluso and your leadership, but for all of the work that has gone on at every level in the district to make this happen, and for it to have happened as successfully as it has.
Thank you. There's
Thank
been
you.
incredible perseverance, I think, and determination to figure it out.
Judge Mays? Mr. Farrell?
Well, thank you both, and Mr. Mather, to all of your team. I know I can only imagine what it's like to go from how things were in February to what your team's experiencing today. So I really have a lot of appreciation for everything that you're all doing. Ms. Morey, a couple weeks ago I'd asked, and it was hot outside, so I'd asked about ventilation in schools, thinking about how hot it was. Now it's cold, and I'm thinking about how cold it is. Has that been an issue, or are we finding ways to be inventive and trying to get the airflow that's helpful to having an in-person environment?
So that's not my area of expertise.
I thought that.
But I would ask Mr. Lawson if you want to come up and help us out here. Mr. Lawson? Mr. Farrell, could you repeat your question one more time, please?
Absolutely, I will.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Lawson. I was, a few weeks ago, I'd asked about ventilation, and in my mind, I was thinking about the warm weather. Now that it's not warm anymore, it's come back up in my mind, so I just wanted to see if there's been any issues, or if we're finding ways to be inventive, especially with the weather changing as frequently as it has, to provide airflow that's beneficial to in-person learning.
This storm obviously caught us well off guard for the temperatures. Most of our boilers hadn't even been started yet. We typically don't have to do that until mid-October. As far as ventilation, most of the filters that we have are MERV 8 level filtration. Depending on the school, depending on the system, like some of the wall type heaters that you see in the older schools, they typically don't have any filtration. We did some checking though with a number of different agencies, and even though we're taking every step we can for filtration and improved air quality, we're very limited with what we have. But we also found out, and it was kind of a surprise to us, there has not been a single documented case of COVID spread through the HVAC system. The only known in the United States, the only known case was in China, that they had it spread through actually an evaporative cooling system. So that was positive that it does not seem to survive well going through the processing in an HVAC system. That was very good news to us. As far as air turnover, we have obviously provided fans in classrooms to help draw in fresh air. We have classrooms that have windows open, again, before this last couple days, to bring in fresh air. And so we're taking quite a few steps like that to at least provide good fresh air quality. We are limited, obviously, with some of the buildings and what we have to work with.
Thank you. And I think that's all I have about facilities, but I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Morey, teacher support-wise, we're learning a lot of new things as we go. Teachers that maybe have not used some of these online programs, services before are now neck deep in them. Is there an ongoing support to help make sure our teachers have the resources that they need to efficiently use all these different services that we've either started using or have been using before, but might be their first time?
I would say there's several different supports that we're trying to put in place. Our specialists, I know, are helping quite a bit with that, helping with some of the technical issues of how do I get this curriculum, this specific curriculum into Google Classroom, some of those logistical issues, especially if it's a new curriculum, which the elementary, middle, and high school literacy curriculum is new. And so figuring that out. So I think our specialists have helped in that area. I know that the technology team has helped in terms of figuring out workarounds for YouTube videos that were previously our students could not access. There's a workaround there. So we recently got some information out to teachers, and I see that as probably a regular type of a communication to say, here are some suggestions, here are some updates. Because as we learn things, or individual teachers learn things, we want to share them with each other. And then we also have our professional development team. There are online classes. There's a series of classes, for example, that you could take for continuing credit on the use of Nearpod and ways to integrate that. There are other courses that are accessible through Frontline that are specifically about delivering distance learning. So there are a variety of different approaches and supports in place. That being said, we don't know what the specific questions are until we hear them, and so it really is helpful when teachers or administrators reach out and say, we're having difficulty with this, can you help us?
And that's good to hear, a lot of cross communication too, that when you do find out that something's been a challenge, that there might be a lot of other people having that same challenge, that you can share that information at that time. Thank you. I had a question about online class sizes, and I know especially probably in the high school level you're still working that out as you figure out scheduling. Is there, can you tell me a little bit about what an online class might look like when they're doing synchronous learning?
So it depends whether it's hybrid or not, because in a hybrid, you're looking at half your students. At the elementary, it's not hybrid, so it's all of your students. The elementary online numbers are lower than our secondary online numbers. I would say our highest elementary online numbers, you're looking at the low 30s. Your highest virtual secondary classes, you're looking right now probably in the low to mid 40s, but half of it. Though that's where we're finding some of the challenges, because they're saying, oh my gosh, my numbers are going up too. That being said, we are not yet firm on our warm body count. And so although in IC it may say, and on a teacher's roster, it may say 45 students, it may only be 37, 38, 39 who are actually attending every day. So we really have to get to a solid enrollment and then at the course level in order to really know the balancing that we need to continue to work on.
I appreciate that. I'm trying to put my feet in a teacher's shoes, thinking about classroom management via a computer, and that kind of scares me with some of those numbers. But I hope that as things balance out and as we continue to work, that will only get better from here, I believe. I did have a question about, we talked about it a little bit with Mr. Mather about tech support and the increased need now that families who are doing remote learning are calling and submitting tickets and having issues that may be with something related to the district or maybe not. Are there resources for non-English speaking families who, when they contact tech support, is there a way that we're able to help them as well?
Well, I'd have to ask tech support specifically on that, but in general, what I can tell you, whenever a question comes into one of our schools, if we have a family who needs translation, we'll access either a district translator or somebody at the school level who has those translation skills. Sometimes it might take a little longer. It might not be, sure, I'll get so-and-so on the line. It sometimes can be that quick, but if we have to access district resources, it would have to be a communication and then a call back. And Mr. Mather, did you want to add specifically on your team how you handle that?
So you pretty much wrapped it up, as we really rely on those people out in the buildings that have that skill set, and then we work with them to help us get through and understand what we're trying to help with.
Has there been a like a communication to families or a posting somewhere on a Google Classroom of how they get help? And if so, is that in multiple languages?
Not necessarily in Google Classroom how they get help, although that's not a bad idea. Here's what I would tell you. I think in general they contact the school. They say whatever their issue is, and they contact the school, and then the school will filter it to wherever the help is, although that's not a bad idea about having something right front and center. As soon as you open it, if you have problems, here's where to go.
Even if it is the school?
Yeah.
That-
And we
I
have
just think that it's
communicated that out
important.
in a variety of ways, but that would be a new one.
Okay. Do we have any kind of, thank you for bearing with my questions. Do we have any kind of district-wide guidelines on behavior in an online environment? Going kind of back to my classroom management discussion.
You want to take that one in terms of the guidelines that we publish to all of our parents and students?
So we did send out a document, at least specific to Google Meet, and those guidelines that talk about how to set that up for really success and use the chat box appropriately for school content and those kind of things. And so every device that we've handed out, parents got a one-pager that listed those types of things specific to that.
Also, this is the first year that we have sent out to all of our schools grade level specific digital citizenship lessons. And so it's a series, grade level specific, a series of lessons. They are prefabbed lessons, if you will, so the teacher doesn't have to recreate the wheel. Each grade level has somewhere between 3 and 6 or so lessons that we're asking them to teach to their students sometime during the first semester. They are sequential and cumulative, if you will. So we've also shared that if any teacher feels like there is a previous year's lesson that would be critical and very applicable to their group of students, they are more than welcome. They have access to all grades to go back to a previous year. And then over time, it'll build the skill set of all of our students.
Thank you. And I'm glad that we're creating expectations for the students when they get the device. Have those same expectations been shared with teachers so that they know what the students have been communicated to expect?
Yes, and we
Okay.
have staff guidelines as well that are specific to staff and
Awesome.
use.
And my last question, I don't know for sure who would answer this one. I keep meaning to ask it, and I get sidetracked every meeting. But I was curious about our community partnerships, like Boys and Girls Club that has used our buildings in the past. Are we finding ways to make that happen, or what does that look like?
We are absolutely finding ways to make that happen, particularly with Boys and Girls Club. Ted is really the point person for that in terms of working with specific organizations and making sure that they have a plan, and we approve their plan and see how best they can interface and whether that makes sense in the current state that we're in or not.
Excellent. That's everything I had. Thank you all.
Dr. Wright?
Superintendent Murray, now that we've been in school for a little bit, have we been able to manage elementary school? Maybe quite difficult having a student remain in space. How has that been begun?
Dr. Wright, I think you're asking a question about the social distancing at the elementary level in the classrooms. Is that correct?
Yes.
Great. I'm glad I got that one. We have seen that our classrooms were ready with the social distancing, with even tape on the floor to make sure that the desks don't move to keep that social distance space, with removing furniture to make sure that there is an area for teachers to teach from, or several areas that keeps their distance as well. So I have not heard of any particular challenges at the elementary level with being able to keep that social distance. And that is, of course, easier because some of our students are online. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Another question. I think I heard you say that students can take their own attendance. Is this based on them looking in, or should they show some evidence of work? How do you determine if a student is participating or still involved?
So a teacher can certainly go in to see what work has been completed by the student, depending upon the particular lesson or activity and how they have outlined it that day. If there's an exit ticket, if there are certain interactive slides that they can go in to see the student work. Students can even submit assignments if that's something that the teacher is asking them to do on their asynchronous days. So there's certainly ways for teachers to track the work and the understandings of students on those off days. In terms of the attendance, it is not directly connected to the student work. It is part of the process that they use when they first check in.
Let me see what's going on back here.
Ms. Patron, are you on the line? Dr. Wright, are you on the line?
Here, they're checking. You got me. Getting up. Okay.
Are we back up and running? Can you hear me,
Yes.
Jerry?
I don't know.
Oh, this phone seems to be dropping the connection, but we've got you back up. And Jerry, thanks for keeping me posted so I can get you hooked up, all right?
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Wright, did you hear the last response?
No, I think you were talking about attendance. Because you stated the students can take their own attendance. And I was asking, how do we verify that they're there?
So students do take their own attendance as the first step in the process of participating during the day. They take attendance in their course. But there's also other means that a teacher can see the work that the students are completing. They can turn in assignments during asynchronous days. They can complete Nearpod individual sort of quick little checks or activities. Sometimes at the end of a lesson, a teacher will put in what they call an exit ticket, which is a quick assessment of the standard that was covered that day. So there's different ways that teachers can see the participation of their students and who completed what work, who might need more help during the synchronous day, and so forth.
Okay, so what you're saying is a teacher can verify it different ways, including an exit ticket to ensure the student was there the entire class?
The teacher could go in to verify participation, yes. The exact attendance, however, is taken by the student as part of their day's activity and participation.
Okay, thank you. And I know and I hear and I recognize it is a challenge with the schedule, particularly moving from online to in-person hybrid to back online. So already I know you're determining with the warm body count exactly how many students we have. So how do you see any challenge in moving from online back to in-person in terms of the impact on staff assignment?
So I think, honestly, we are still working on finalizing a schedule that will enable that transition back in person at the high school level. As you know, K-8, they're already in person, but at the high school level, we are still looking at what is going to be the most effective schedule that will allow students and teachers to transition the most smoothly to an in-person learning environment if that's what their parents chose for them.
Okay, and part of that would be the students being able to take the classes that they need. determining whether or not we can meet their needs?
Yes, and I think that's what Ms. Clementi was talking about earlier as well. We're still trying to figure that out and make sure that the classes, the courses that students need, they can access, and making those changes first, and at the same time thinking about how is that balance going to work when some students are coming back. So honestly, that is something we're still working through at the high school level right now, which is why we don't have a start date yet in person. We want to make sure that's solidly in place first.
Well, I want to thank you very much, and I've heard of the hard work that principals are doing to help meet these needs, teachers are doing, and adapting, adjusting, and changing, and shifting. So,
Dr. Wright, are you there?
working together and be dynamic. Yes, can you hear me?
We do now.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Are you still there, Dr. Wright?
Can you hear me, President?
We can hear you now. Can you hear us?
Oh, yes, yes. I was thanking Assistant Superintendent. I was thanking the principals, the teachers, all the staff for, I know it's a lot of changes, shifting. Thank you so much for working hard to help meet the needs of our students. We appreciate you all.
Thank you.
The one question I have as far as training goes, did the teachers that are teaching in person receive the same training as the teachers that are teaching online in case we have to go fully online?
Yes, so far they've received the same training and/or they have the same opportunities. It so far has been the same because we know they may need to go virtual. Many of our 612 teachers are teaching both right now.
Right.
So they're getting both experiences simultaneously already.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Are there any other questions? Well, thank you again to our entire staff for everything you're doing. We really do appreciate it. Thank you. We'll move on now to the Risley International Academy of Innovation Accountability Pathway Update.
And we'll just keep you there, Mrs. Maury.
Okay. President Voss, Superintendent Macaluso, members of the board. Yesterday, Superintendent Macaluso and myself presented an update and also made a request to the Colorado State Board of Education on behalf of Risley International Academy of Innovation. So I wanted to update you on that. As you know, the current 2018 order for Risley requires that an outside entity wholly manage Risley in a full-time capacity. When we received that state order, D60 undertook an extensive RFP process and we identified MGT as that managing partner. In 2019-20, last year, in addition to providing direct support and oversight, MGT subcontracted a lot of services to other organizations. Most of these organizations we had already worked with previously and or were currently working with under separate contracts. These subcontract organizations included the University of Virginia, UVA, Two Partners Mathematics Consulting, and most recently the Relay Graduate School of Education. During this past year, MGT and Risley experienced successes as well as challenges under MGT's full management authority. Their authority began in the spring of 2019. MGT had difficulty finding a school leader to provide comprehensive in-person support to Risley's principal. And although a talented, experienced leader was eventually found in late September, it was a challenge for a Denver-based educator to respond in a timely way to those daily concerns and decisions that came up around parents and staffing and instructional needs. And then, of course, COVID-19 emergency school closure responses posed even more difficulties. I know both MGT and the district would say it was challenging, very challenging during that past year. One consistently supportive aspect of the contract, though, last year was the work performed by the subcontractors. Two Partners started their coaching work last year and they continued into this summer in preparation for this year. Over the summer, We also had our principal and myself and Superintendent Macaluso and some other school and district leaders attend UVA. And that training was very valuable. It provided protocols around turnaround and structures, and also an opportunity for the new principal at Risley to work with other turnaround principals and leaders across the nation. And then leadership coaching with Relay began this past spring in preparation for the opening of this school year, and also provided extensive support for our principal in developing a 90-day plan, which is already in place. So those subcontractors really have provided quite a bit of support. At this time, Risley has a number of successes that I wanted to share with you to build upon. Recent successes. So although last year, you'll remember, the state assessments were not administered, we did have school assessments. The Achievement Network were some of our interim assessments, and other school measures. And before the closure, there was some indication to show us that there was progress being made in literacy, particularly at the 8th and the 7th grade level. Janelle Manus was hired, and Janelle's with us today. She's right back there. She was hired as the new principal. We're very excited about that. She also has a new administrative team in place for this year. And I have to tell you, Janelle and her team and many of the staff literally worked all summer to get the school ready to open. And I don't mean just the COVID health and safety pieces, which was significant, but the whole school is repainted. There are new murals. There's new bulletin boards everywhere. They had partnerships that Janelle was able to secure to purchase furniture for the staff room, and they painted offices, and there's just all sorts of things. You really have to go over and take a look. It looks great, and it shows such a sense of pride. And I personally heard many staff come back and students who were like, like they noticed it and how amazing it was. So go over and take a look for sure. Risley implemented new standards-aligned math curriculum last year, and then this year they're piloting the new literacy curriculum. What's most important about that is that both of these curricula have digital components, so that staff and students can access all of the materials digitally, which of course is very important this year with virtual learning and hybrid learning. There's also digital assessments that are embedded as well, so that is critical. Risley's new principal attended UVA, as I was sharing with you, and I also just wanted to thank Superintendent Macaluso for joining us over the summer. It was a big commitment, and that's also helped us to be prepared in moving forward. So last March, as you remember, through the end of the school year, when we had to transition to at-home learning, MGT had limited ability to fully manage Risley due to that emergency school closure. And they did remain in contact with school leadership, but it was very challenging for them to observe online classes, to support those daily decisions, and so forth. Entering into this school year, MGT could potentially have limited access to classrooms, again, because of the CDE ruling on the number of adults allowed in a classroom. It might even be difficult for them to access the building at some point. We don't know. There may be a need at some point to make very efficient, timely, supportive decisions around COVID. If there were a COVID exposure and cohorts might have to be quarantined, that would have to be an immediate response in collaboration with the district. And so that on-site, in-person, in-district support is really critical, and it would be extraordinarily challenging for somebody who is up in Denver or maybe located someplace else to be right there to deliver that leadership. If the state board's 2018 full management order continues into this year, the district would likely have to figure out how to work with MGT and the subcontracted partners to piece together a full management approach. But nevertheless, it's going to leave the district with an unclear and significant role in ensuring Risley implements the district's COVID-19 dynamic safety school plans and the turnaround goals effectively. So therefore, we requested a change to the state-directed action for Risley from full management to partial management. At the conclusion of the state board presentation yesterday, the state board voted 7-0 to direct the AG's office to draft a permanent change to the state order for Risley from full management to partial management. The state board will vote on this change at their October board meeting or possibly sooner if they can manage that. If the change order passes, we proposed and shared that we would leverage the collaborative expertise of Relay and UVA, with Relay serving as the partial manager for Risley. This is an approach that we already have in place at Central High School and at Minnequa, two of our other Pueblo schools that are under board-directed action. Relay and UVA have experience working together, and they have exceptional virtual coaching and professional development capacity. We've already been using it this past year, very confident in that. This plan is more likely than full management to provide a clearer picture also of the roles and responsibilities for improvement at Risley. It also promises to provide a seamless transition because these partners have already been in place over the summer and have worked directly into the opening of this school year. And they've already worked in tandem with district leadership in past years. Relay has agreed to serve as the partial manager for Risley pending the state board modification to Risley's order. We currently have a preliminary contract in place, as you know, with MGT. However, we've always had a very transparent relationship with MGT. They're fully aware of this proposed change, and we're confident that should the change order be supported and voted on by the state board, we would be able to reach a mutually agreeable resolution with MGT. More specifically, we propose to shift the authority and decision-making for Risley that was previously assigned to MGT to both Relay and to the district, while also continuing to work with those other partners that I've mentioned. Relay would act as the official partial management entity with authority and decision-making over curriculum, assessment, and teacher and leader professional development. That is the same work that they've been doing in the summer, so that would continue. The district would retain operational authority over the school, including staffing and budgeting, as well as any of the adjustments necessary because of COVID-19. Risley would also continue to work with UVA, the work that was started already in the summer, which was originally outlined in MGT's plan. Risley would continue content coaching for English language arts and for math teachers. Both of those were part of the original plan with MGT. But actually, we propose to substantially increase the number of days of coaching in both math and literacy. So the math content coaching provided by two partners who were previously subcontracted by MGT would actually double, and the number of English language coaching days previously handled by MGT would actually double. At the heart of Relay's management of Risley is on-site and virtual coaching for school and district leaders. I'm going to be directly supervising from the district, Risley, during this coming year. And I've had the opportunity already when working at Minnequa to work closely with Jennifer Bauer. Jennifer Bauer is the relay coach assigned to Pueblo this year. Ms. Bauer and I, because of the work together, we've built some strong working protocols and also figured out how to align support and coaching to a school. And that's a key piece when you have more than one organization or entity supporting one school. So I feel confident that that will be aligned for our leaders in our school. Both UVA and Relay also have a close collaboration, and so they have those working agreements and understandings in place as well. Relay will provide progress monitoring updates to you during the course of this year. And it's also important to note that the Risley principal, Janelle, and both of her assistant principals have already gone through the Relay Graduate School of Education National Principals Academy Fellowship. So All of this is really aligned with the other strategies that we have in place at the district level. During the past year, CDE engaged in regular progress monitoring visits at Risley, and that support's going to continue this coming year. CDE will visit or have a video meeting at least 6 times. That meeting would be with school leadership, myself, and often also the CDE support personnel. So we've already planned that, and as long as we can keep in alignment with the safety and health guidelines from COVID-19, some of those visits would involve classroom observations and so forth. CDE will document those reflections, and as you remember last year, they did present to you once or twice to share the progress, and they will continue to do that. Right now, it's tentatively scheduled for them to come to co-present with Relay approximately December and May. So that will still be in place. So to recap, D60 yesterday requested and received initial support to permanently modify the state-directed action for Risley from full management to partial management. The AG's office is drafting up this change, and the state board will vote on it at their October meeting or sooner if they're able. So at this time, I am happy to take any questions that you may have.
Ms. Clementi?
Okay, I was able to listen to the state board meeting and the presentation that Superintendent Macaluso and her team presented. It was cogent, succinct, to the point. It was a very well done and well prepared presentation, so I thank you for that. Well, first of all, I'm grateful that you all stayed on top of this and didn't let this particular relationship just kind of slide. It's my sense that there had been difficulties with that particular partnership and that particular order from the state board. Just in general. And I think it's worth noting that that same organization, MGT, is the full management. Aren't they in charge of full partnership management with an entire district in the state?
Yes.
And so they had to be stretched pretty thin themselves. So I'm grateful that you all have stayed on top of that and took the initiative to go back to the board and ask for a change in their order so that we could do things differently. Very grateful for that. Thank you. I want to add that you all did a great job responding to the questions that were answered yesterday or asked yesterday. They were challenging and not often on topic. So thanks for your your work with that. I'm eager to see the revised order and for us to move forward with new leadership at Risley and a new plan. Thank you.
Mr. Farrell?
I just want to say thank you to the district leadership and the leadership of the Risley as well for working to get a solution that's going to be best for our school and keeping on top of things like Ms. Clementi mentioned and making sure that we were acting in the best interest of the school. So thank you for your work in presenting to the state board, and thank you for ahead of time for all the work that's going to happen at Risley in this coming year.
Dr. Wright, any questions, comments?
No questions. Again, I just echo the thanks for all that hard work. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Maury.
It's always our pleasure to present to the state board. It's always loads of fun. But I would add that this really allows us to provide coherence and alignment with the services provided based on the needs of the school. And what we really tried to express to the state board is that the order itself has been challenging and problematic. And it is quite different to have full management over a district and try to implement full management of a school within a district. So Thanks for your work, Ms. Maury.
We'll move on now to 10.0 policy. Superintendent Macaluso.
Thank you. This is I believe is a second and final reading. And so Mr. Bravo will present the following policies in regard to consideration of the Title IX regulations. Mr. Bravo.
Thank you, President Voss, Superintendent Macaluso, and members of the board. Again, I'm here for a second reading of several Title IX policies. Policy revisions were temporarily approved on first reading during the August 25th board meeting, but still the policies require final approval.
And it's my understanding that there were no changes from the last time, is that correct?
There were no recommendations.
From first reading?
I appreciate the work that was done on this, and I have a motion if you're
Sure.
ready. I move that this Board of Education permanently approve the modifications to the board policies listed in today's work. Do you want me to read all of them? All having to do with updates with Title IX, and that they are permanently accepted on second and final reading tonight.
Second.
Is there any discussion? I'll call for the vote, please.
Ms. Clementi?
Aye.
Mr. Farrell?
Aye.
Judge Mays?
Aye.
Mr. Voss?
Aye.
Dr. Wright?
I think
Dr.
it was
Wright?
partial aye.
Aye. Did you hear me? Yes,
We got it
thank
that
you.
time. All right, with that, we'll move on to number 2.
Thank you. I believe Mr. DeCicero has the next policies. This is also for second reading.
Yes, good afternoon again. This is also just to align these policies together because they go together. This is the staff portion of that policy. As a reminder, it was approved as a temporary passage last month, and we're seeking permanent approval tonight. There were no changes recommended from the last meeting. And remember, this is to have a brand new GBAA policy and repeal the old GBAAs and the regs that go along with that. There are 3 policies for repeal.
All right, with that, I will move that we approve the modifications to Board Policy GBAA and repeals Board Policy GBAA-R, Board Policy GBAAA, and Board Policy GBAAA-R on second and final reading.
Second.
Any discussion? I'll call for the vote, please.
Ms. Clementi?
Aye.
Mr. Farrell?
Aye.
Judge Mays?
Aye.
Mr. Voss?
Aye.
Dr. Wright? Aye.
Thank you. With that, we'll move to the consent agenda. Are there any consent agenda items anyone would like to be removed to be voted on separately? Then I will move that we approve the consent agenda items 2 through 10 as presented in today's board materials.
Second.
Any discussion? I'll call for the vote, please.
Ms. Clementi?
Aye.
Mr. Farrell?
Aye.
Judge Mays?
Aye.
Mr. Voss?
Aye.
Dr. Wright?
Dr. Wright, are you there?
Dr. Wright? Aye. Can you hear me? Yes, thank you.
All right, thank you. Next, we'll be moving to executive session.
Excuse me, before we move, could I just make a couple comments?
Sure.
One, I'd like to remind everyone that the 2020 census is still out there. Colorado has about a 70% response. I think we're a little higher here in Pueblo County. but it's essential that we have 100%. And so I would urge all of us to reach out in every way possible to make sure that all of our community members are counted in the census. It will matter for a full decade in very large ways, and it's so, so important. It has to do with how our votes are counted. It has to do with how often we can provide free lunches or food to our communities. It has to do with, it reaches into so many different areas. And this deadline has been shortened to September 30th. So there's two weeks, basically, maybe a little bit more than 2 weeks for that to happen. So I thought it was worth mentioning before we adjourn. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. So I will move that the Board of Education meet in executive session to discuss potential lease or sale of real property pursuant to CRS 24-6-402, Paren 4, Paren A, legal matters, and to receive legal advice and the opinion of counsel on specific legal questions and pending and threatened litigation pursuant to CRS 24-6-402, Paren 4, Paren B, determining positions relative to matters that are or will be subject to contract negotiations, other than collective bargaining contracts, developing strategy for those negotiations, and instructing negotiators pursuant to CRS 24-6-402, Paren 4, Paren E, and personnel matters including the superintendent's evaluation and actions, updates, and superintendent recommendations involving individual employees pursuant to CRS 24-6-402, Paren 4, Paren F.
Second.
I'll call for the vote, please.
Ms. Clemente?
Aye.
Mr. Farrell?
Aye.
Judge May?
Aye.
Mr. Voss?
Aye.
Dr. Wright? Aye.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
President Voss, does this effectively adjourn the meeting, the business meeting for today?
It does.
So we will not be coming back.
No, we won't be coming back.